Jordan Peterson just interviewed a woman that said some remarkable things. When you take a moment to consider the implications of what she's saying, you're going to realize it's very biblical. As a matter of fact, the book of Revelation deals with it, and I'm going to show it to you. All right, folks, let's get into it. This is incredible. Now, as you guys know, I watch Jordan Peterson every now and again because he oftentimes interviews some pretty extraordinary people, and Jordan is a really, really smart man. He is on a quest. It is very obvious that he seems to be inching closer and closer to Christ. And the person that he interviewed the other day is absolutely remarkable. Now, at the time you watch this, he will have already interviewed her a week ago, but the content of what she says is shocking. And quite frankly, it is very, very, very eye-opening. Now, as usual, I would recommend that you watch the interview. It's in entirety. We are going to go over roughly about 20 minutes of this interview to speak about the areas that I believe are the most consequential to the point that I'm bringing up, but I would encourage you to watch the video in its entirety. And there's a lot of reasons for me saying this because there's some context that you should understand in watching it. But all of this leads us to a passage in the book of Revelation that I want to take you to, and I think it's going to open up your eyes to see what's really going on and what's happening. Of course, I will say this. Most of you already have your eyes open and you're already seeing what's going on, but I'm going to reemphasize what you already know to be true. And what I'm hoping is there will be people that will watch this video that will actually see things that they have not seen at all and cause everybody to do a little bit of thinking. Now, let me tell you about this woman. I'm going to read the description that Jordan Peterson writes about this woman so that you understand her background a little bit. And there's one detail that Jordan Peterson does not write in this description that I'm going to talk to you about, and then I'm going to show you this interview and a portion of this interview. And folks, I'm telling you, some of the commentary I provide, I hope will shed some light on what the real issue is. This woman is remarkable and is intuitive. Jordan Peterson, as a matter of fact, refers to her as top 10 of the most important or special or good people in the world. So Jordan Peterson says something like that, it's going to put some weight on who this woman is and how remarkable she actually is. But either way, let me read the description. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, a senior fellow with the Future of Diplomacy Project at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and best-selling author of Infidel, which was written in 2007, and Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. That book was written in 2015. Born in Mogadishu, Somalia, Hirsi Ali strove to live as a devout Muslim during her early life, but in 1992 fled to the Netherlands to escape a forced marriage and became a citizen and went on a study at the University of Leiden from 2003 to 2006. Hirsi Ali served as an elected member of the Dutch Parliament and then moved to the U.S., where she founded the AHA Foundation to protect and defend the rights of women from harmful traditional practices. In 2024, Hirsi Ali founded RestorationBulletin.com, where she explores the forces of subversion plaguing Western society. Now, if you don't understand what the forces of subversion are, you're going to get an explanation of that in just a minute. But here's one detail that did not come out in Jordan's description that I would like to give you because it's exciting. And that is in 2023, this woman became a Christian and was very happy about becoming a believer. As a matter of fact, she went from being a Muslim to becoming an atheist, and a very, very devout atheist, for lack of a better term. And then she gave her life to Christ last year. And so she is a committed believer. Every source that I know tells me that she loves the Lord and that she's a very sincere woman. And quite frankly, she's a brilliant woman. So let's watch a portion of this interview. Again, you will see some interruptions, and then we're going to bring this to the book of Revelation, and hopefully it's going to make a lot of sense. I want you to remember one thing. Satan is always using the same tricks. He is always bringing about the same things. And when you think about the idea of subversion, Satan is all about that. So when you see this stuff, just understand the Bible warned us about this. And we know, and when we get into Revelation, it's going to blow your mind when you see the parallels of what happens when secular humanistic philosophy becomes a major part of man's form of idealism and how it changes everything. And you know what else it does? It gets us excited about what we know is coming in the future and gets us better equipped to be prepared for what we know we're facing. So let's watch this. It's a remarkable portion of this interview. Jordan Peterson is about to ask her to explain what subversion is all about, what she means in combating it, and listen to what she has to say because it's pretty remarkable. Okay, here we go.
Let's do two things. The first is, why don't you talk a bit more about what you mean by subversion, where that might be stemming from, right? Because that's a mysterious question. And then also address the issue of whether or not you find yourself surprised to be in the position that you're in, having to say the sorts of things, let's say, that you're saying to me now. So let's start with subversion.
The opening essay in Subversion, the bulletin, so my platform on Substack, has to do with, I start by describing the fact that many of us feel that something is off. And that, like in the parable of the Buddhists, we're all trying to figure out what is it that is off. So we're all these blind people, we're touching different parts of the elephant, and we're trying to figure out what this whole is. When I look at these, take any list, I'm in the academic world, and I see what has happened to academia from the time I came as a student in 1995 in the University of Leiden to my present role at Stanford. And
by the way, I just have to say this before she goes on. I cannot believe that Stanford actually has not gotten rid of her or removed her, especially with some of the things that she stands for. Now, what's really interesting is she reminds me a lot of John Lennox in the sense that she's a very respected person. And although there's a lot of people that fiercely disagree with her, as a matter of fact, there are atheists all over the place right now that are writing about her and how much they have been let down by her because she was a big voice in that community. Because the fact that she's now become a Christian, there's a lot of very upset people about it. For some reason, the Lord has opened up the door for people to respect her. And I think it's because she is a respecter and a seeker of truth. And of course, when people are seeking truth, they're going to be open to any kind of dialogue. And so this is what she's going to deal with right here. She's talking about the idea that when totalitarianism creeps in, that in essence, it closes the door for open dialogue. And of course, this is the way Satan operates. And we know that this is how the final Antichrist is going to be operating. And this is something that we should undoubtedly be expecting when that time comes. So let's pay attention to what she says about this, because it is indeed remarkable.
It's just this churning out of very expensive, useless degrees in gender and race and you name it. That's the universities. K to 12, there is this crisis that I see because I'm a parent. Parents around me homeschooling their children, going from A to B, just completely confused about what is it that's going on with our education systems. They're on the brink of collapse.
And I would argue that they have already collapsed in many ways. Education systems are indoctrination systems, not just at the collegiate level, but they're certainly, and most certainly, at the elementary school, high school, junior high school level. That's why my children will never step foot into a public school, ever, ever, ever. They will always be homeschooled because the indoctrination variables that exist within homeschool is terrible. And she's going to talk about this a little bit more. And it's interesting that she just right off the cuff talks about these useless degrees in gender studies and all that kind of nonsense. Of course she knows, because they speak against what we know to be natural and true, and the standards that are empirical and based on empirically backed data have pretty much gone bye-bye, because of the existentialist mindset that has existed within the minds and the hearts of so many of these people. And when I talk about existentialism, folks, let me tell you what I mean when I say this. They, in the college level, believe that you can have one thing that has one point of view here, another that has another point of view. They can be antithetically opposed to one another, meaning they're completely different from one another, and they should all be able to maintain the same level of truth, even though they're completely opposed to one another in what they call some weird form of synthesis. Now, if that sounds confusing, that's because it is. It's a bunch of nonsense, and it's part of a dialectic oftentimes referred to as the Hegelian dialectic. It's garbage. It says you have a thesis and antithesis, and they can both coexist through what they call the synthesis. It's a nonsense. It's basically a way for being able to justify never having a truthful standard, and it's hogwash. And that's what they're learning at the college level. And, you know, this is why, and she's even going to talk about it, this is why you can have these people running around college campuses going, free, free Palestine, queers for Palestine, totally not understanding what it would look like if they were in the middle of Gaza or Judea, Samaria, and what they would do with that group of people. Very interesting. But she's going to lay that out here pretty good. Let's listen to her.
There are these statements that are contrary to reality, that there is an endless number of genders. There's this whole, what seemed like in, 10, 15 years ago when I first heard about terms like intersectionality and oppressor and oppressed and all the rest of it, it just seemed like some, to me, juvenile, intellectual mishmash, nonsensical, the sort of things that first year freshmen students dabble in, and then they grow up and they grow out of it.
Okay, can I just bring this out? And I understand why she says juvenile, because you have these kids that are freshmen in college, and they're like, they're thinking all idealistically. They're confused about what they want to do. They're very, whatever, and they do their protesting for a few hours and, go and do something else for another few hours, and then they go try to change the world for another few hours. But this is not what this is. I'm going to take this a step further, and I'm going to say that this is very satanic. None of this is what I would not write this off as juvenile, and I would suspect that if you give Miss Ali some time to really dig deeper than she's already dug, and she's dug very deep into this, especially being that she's very new in her walk with the Lord, she will eventually come to the conclusion that I have already come to, and that this is very satanic. This is satanic inspiration that is being deployed worldwide to get ready for what we know is going to take place in the context of Revelation chapter 6, for example, which we're going to go over for just a few minutes. So this is satanically inspired. This is demonically inspired. It's wicked on literally every level.
And then along comes 2020, and we have that incident with George Floyd in the United States of America. And what then happens is what I only can describe as a revolution, because we went full on with the defund the police. Let's abolish SATs and other standardized tests. Mathematics is racist. Everything is racist. And this demolition, clearly demolition of ideas and institutions of like the family, education. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is familiar.
And when she says this is familiar, you have to understand what she means when she says this is familiar. This is a woman who was raised in oppressive or under oppressive regimes. She knows how this all works. And by the way, there is a very common thread that exists between Islam and Marxism. There's a really, really interesting tie that exists between there, and she is one of the best at making those connections. But the thing that I should point out here is the fact that this is all a satanic ploy. When George Floyd happened, Satan got the minds and the hearts so deeply confused and affected by what was clearly a fog that did not keep people aware of what was truthfully happening. We look back at the whole George Floyd situation now, and you realize that the officer that did what he did actually acted within policy. And not only did he act within policy, he acted according to his training. And his chief got up there and lied, completely lied about what they were trained to do and what they weren't trained to do. And now as the facts are coming out, you have a guy who is sitting in prison over the death of a man who we know now died not of suffocation from what this officer did to detain the individual who was higher than a kite. He actually passed away because of the drug overdose. Now, there's so much else to be said about this, and this is a very long and extended discussion with respect to how George Floyd set a whole bunch of things off. But I will say that the tool and the mechanism of cultural Marxism, not economic Marxism, but cultural Marxism, was actually deployed hundreds of years ago in different forms before Marx ever even existed, right? Because Satan, the one who brings this stuff about, just does it in new ways. And what we're seeing right now is a resurfacing of something that's actually even more extreme than what Marx actually looked at or thought about. And this is all very satanic. And this is the enemy using even world governments to get people to be blinded. By the way, let's not get confused here. Let's not get it twisted. There were people in churches that were buying into this stuff. I mean, you remember all these videos that I showed you of, you know, the new but not so great pastor at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa that was, you know, crying for George Floyd, and now all of a sudden is an expert on white privilege and Juneteenth and all the other nonsense that goes with the ground. I mean, Brian is just completely gone. And I'm not even trying to name names. I don't want to put people on the map because I have no desire to talk about things like that very specifically. But the reality of it is Andy Stanley went down that route. And many other people went down that route about this whole nonsense of intersectionality and white privilege and racism. And I mean, it's like everywhere. It's like a disease. It's a cancer. And now even in the churches that I just mentioned, they're fully embracing the homosexual lifestyle. They are walking according to precedent that is completely unbiblical because all of the stuff that she's mentioning is designed to take over the mind and the heart and to change the very course of society so that there are no absolutes. If you throw away empirical data like mathematics and you call it racist, and if you throw away things like time and you throw away all kinds of other things in the name of saying it's racist, well, then you no longer have any standards. And if you no longer have any standards, then anything goes. And if anything goes, then you can pretty much cause a society to go into a state of anarchy. And while that society goes into a state of anarchy, the people around the society that can't make any sense of what's happening begin to fall into the patterns of, you know, mass formation psychosis, and then literally goes down the place of being formed and manipulated by the ideals of these cultural Marxists who in essence are only catering to a small group of globalists or a small group of elitists that pretty much want to run the world by things through popular or population control and all the other stuff that's going on. So it's not one big conspiracy theory, it's a big conspiracy. And that conspiracy, the greatest promulgator of that conspiracy is the devil himself. So none of this should surprise us. This is the kind of thing that we see happening again and again and again and again. It's in a repeatable, identifiable pattern. We see it show its ugly face on a regular basis. We're seeing it happen on a much more mass scale than we've ever seen before in human history. I believe because, number one, we have more technology that can do this a lot faster and a lot easier and a lot more effective, but perhaps more significantly than that, I think we're in the end times. And as we're getting closer to those last days, we're going to see this stuff get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So pay close attention to what she says, because the things that she's observing are things that, you know, are easily replicatable within the context of how we know Satan is going to continue to work. This is what he does. These are his tactics.
And let's pay attention to the people who are leading the charge in these projects to destroy the structures that and the institutions that have served us so well. And on the one hand, you have these identity politics, cultural Marxists that have developed these elaborate theories that they call critical theories. And it's not a conspiracy theory, Jordan. They state it as clearly as possible that they want to bring down, they point to all of these injustices and they say the answer to all of this is to bring down these structures and destroy them.
By the way, when she talks about bringing down the structures and destroying them, what structures is she talking about? She's talking about the structures of religion. She's talking about Christianity specifically. She's talking about the family structure. When you talk about Black Lives Matter, when they came around and started to become very prominent during the time of George Floyd, they made it very clear. They weren't even apologizing for it. They get on their website, the two founders of Black Lives Matter, both lesbians, both, by the way, who say that they are Satan worshipers. They have no problem talking about the kind of things that they do and their ideas. They all say they're trained Marxists. And the whole picture that they wanted to draw, matter of fact, when it became unpopular, they took it off their website, but they said that one of the primary objectives of an organization like Black Lives Matter is to take mothers and make them, permanent protesters or perpetual protesters while also dismantling the nuclear family. It's just amazing to me. So when you begin to think about the idea or the picture of these institutions that maintain stability, these are the institutions that God created, right? The institution of marriage, the institution of family is like the institution of the sun and the moon and the stars. If you don't have those institutions, the existence of all that is stable goes away. It's very interesting. So she's talking about this and she's making it very, very clear that these are the things that are all under attack, and they've been under attack for quite some time now. We've been watching it over the last several years, and a lot of people have been buying it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, you look at what's going on right now in the Christian world, or what we call the Christian world. Look at the crazy people, the Russell Moores of the world, and the Ed Stetzers, and all the other nonsense that people are beginning to come out and say, the garbage that they're spewing out. It's so unbelievably demonic. And I talked about this earlier this week. I released a video on Monday talking about how the lies that are oftentimes propagated by this form of cultural Marxism is causing people to even be confused about something as basic as sex in the name of calling it gender. This is the world that we're going into. Okay? It's bad. It's bad. Look what she goes on to say.
I see the Islamists, and the Islamists have never really been dishonest. It was always in your face, but they first tried many years to bring down our system through terror and terrorist plots and relentless terrorist attempts. And they failed at that. We are militarily and economically and technologically superior to them. And so obviously they went down the path of dawah, which is a religious subversion, which is, it has a much longer timeline.
Which, by the way, when she talks about this, these doctrines or principles of Islam is very interesting. The whole idea is you spend lots of time re-indoctrinating the minds of the people to listen to and worship these false gods. And deception is one of the core tenets of it all. As a matter of fact, when you look at the views of Islam, you can see it very clearly, and it's not anything that they're hiding. None of this is being hidden. Let me read to you a phrase from the Quran. This is in 354, and I'll just be very, very clear in the translation. I'll read it in Arabic first. It says, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرَ الْمَكَرِينَ, which basically, when we speak about this in Arabic, it means that they were deceptive, so Allah is deceptive. Why? Because Allah is the chief of deceivers. And by the way, this is very important, right? Muslims are encouraged by the Quran, which in and of itself is a deceptive book. And the tenets of the existence of the Quran aren't even real. The Quran isn't even a real document. It's a fabricated document for a lot of reasons. And I did a video with Jay Smith that I think you guys should look at. I'll attach it right here for you guys so you can go see it. You can go watch that, where I talk about, where Jay actually talks about the fact that the Quran is actually fake. I mean, if you think about it, it's not even the document that these Muslims claim it to be. And we'll even show you the world's foremost expert on the Quran actually saying, yeah, it comes from lots of different sources. Very interesting. But there's a lot of deception involved. And so when she talks about this, look, they use lots of tools. They encourage having lots of children so that you can indoctrinate the children to become Muslims. You're seeing this, by the way, in Gaza. You're seeing this in Judea and Samaria. They're teaching the kids. It's admirable. It's honorable to kill Jews. this is the propagation of these types of lies. When you look at the Black Islamic movement, right? The Black Islamic movement is a cult of Islam. And although Muslims are not fans of Black people, they will embrace the Black Islamic movement so that they can continue to propagate their deception concerning what Islam is all about. And it's interesting because if you want to know how you can be sure of the fact that these Muslims don't like Black people, they're still to this day the greatest traders. They are the ones that do the most trading of Black slaves in the world today. They've always been that way. They're still that way today. So all of this stuff that she's bringing about is very valid and very important, because Islam has a big part to do with this growing tide of all of the stuff that we're seeing with all of these critical theory nonsense movements and all this stuff. Islam is right at the center of it.
If you look at the CCP and Putin, and these are external adversaries, and they're looking at what's going on our soil domestically, and they would be stupid not to take advantage of that. So as I try to look into and analyze, again, think of me as one of the blind men touching the elephant, is to say, where have we seen this before? Now, communist attempts at subverting the West are as old as communism. They're as old as, the times of the Bolsheviks and Lenin and all the various Marxists. And when the Soviet Union was established, they had programs to subvert us, and it was mutual. We had programs to subvert them. So when you listen, I quote Yuri Bezmenov at length, where he describes their length. You just listen to him and the institutions that he describes and the intended effects of that kind of subversion, and it's right before your eyes. You don't really need a conspiracy theorist for that. The Islamists, it's the same thing. What's interesting about all of this is to see this collusion between the Islamists and the neo-Marxists or cultural Marxists, what is called the unholy green-red alliance. Some people describe it as the watermelon, and you think, okay, where is this going? Queers for Palestine looks nice in Colombia on these things that on a plaque that students hold up. But what would queers look like if they were actually in Gaza or the West Bank? We know what they look. We know what happens.
I mean, the points that she's bringing out are so incredibly true. And what she's talking about really centers around the deception that Satan continues to deploy. He gets people to look at things one way, completely not understanding the full implications of what it is that they're actually believing or the lie that they're believing. And one of the points of this that she's bringing out is this literally this unholy collusion that exists between the cultural Marxist and Islam. But the thing is you shouldn't be surprised when there's a direct collusion between one satanic ideal and philosophy and another satanic ideal and philosophy. Satan created Islam. Satan created cultural Marxism. Heck, he created economic Marxism in many ways, right? Because all it does is it brings emptiness, right? When you look at economic Marxism, at its completion, everybody knows it fails. Satan destroys everything he puts his hands to. So even those that were the heftiest of economic Marxisms will all tell you it doesn't work anymore. That's why they're placing so much of an emphasis on cultural Marxism. But cultural Marxism is, in essence, a repackaged version of what you actually see prominent in Islam, which is a repackaged version of so many of the things that we've seen prominent in the past. So there isn't this conspiracy theorist mindset that's necessary. All you need to do is understand that there's been a grand conspirator, and the collusion that has existed over the years through the direction of that grand conspirator is something that now in the current moment is involving Islam, and now in the current moment is involving a series of different cultural Marxisms. But Satan is the grand conspirator, and he continues to use these lies to deceive people that they may fall into a place of complete and total annihilation. This is what he does. And this is why this passage in Revelation that we're going to go through is so significant.
But that aside, the question of, is there subversion And has it been effective? Are we on the brink to all of that? The answer is yes. And my remedy for that is restoration. Recognize the institutions, the ideas, it's our elites. And then we have to come together.
By the way, the one thing that she's not going to tell you, but or you're not going to hear it in this interview, but if you know her and you read any of her works, her idea behind destroying this subversion is restoration. That's what she talks about, but restoration back to the biblical ideals. It's just very interesting because she sees, and she says it very openly, Christianity is the only answer to fix all of this, which is pretty amazing. All right, let's get back into what she says here.
And restore this. And so not together in these empty sort of platitudinous ways, but to say what made us different as Western societies is that we used to disagree. And actually, we used to think it was fun to disagree. The other day, I had a debate with, well, I didn't think of it as a debate. I thought it was a lovely conversation with Richard Dawkins, where we live in a world where a lot of people who watched that discussion, their takeaway was not, oh, how interesting. This one has to say that, and, what are the arguments that they're making, etc. No, it was, there was suddenly this enemy-friend thing. Yeah, and I think for me, the greatest takeaway from that whole thing was the hug at the beginning and the hug at the end, that it is possible to disagree on fundamental issues and continue to have that affection for one another.
And I think this is really remarkable of this woman, because you have to understand the significance of her having a conversation with Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, by the way, is, I would call him the cult leader of atheism. Although it's very interesting, recently Richard Dawkins is actually calling himself a cultural Christian. That's kind of an interesting thing. The implications of that is could be profound with respect to what happens in the future with him. I don't know. I think that he is genuinely searching for truth, but I think he's not willing to admit that he already knows what the truth is, and go in that direction. Now, he is an adamant atheist. He says these things in the name of science. I think if you ever want to see what, in my opinion, what might be one of the most entertaining debates involving Richard Dawkins, it would be Richard Dawkins and John Lennox. John Lennox does a phenomenal job of addressing the area that science can't really seem to address, that Richard Dawkins is particularly bothered by. Now, I'm going to assume that the Richard Dawkins of today that speaks to Miss Ali is probably a different Richard Dawkins than the one that you're going to see speaking to John Lennox. Although I have not seen the conversation between her and Richard Dawkins, which I am looking forward to seeing, I'm going to assume it was a much more cohesive conversation where two people are expressing their profound differences with one another. And I do know that Richard Dawkins does respect her immensely, even though she is no longer an atheist. And I do believe that if someone like Richard Dawkins is going to come to know the Lord, he's going to come to know the Lord through a brilliant woman like this. So, but what I do appreciate with what she's saying is she's saying, we need to go back to the time where we could all sit down, have an adamant difference in our views, antithetically opposed views, but have a conversation as though we're two people searching for the truth. And that's the bigger thing. If you can get two people searching for the truth, then you don't ever have to be threatened by the conversation, because if your common goal is the same as my common goal and we're both pursuing the truth, then you can't lose. It's a very, very important distinction to be made.
And if you don't want to have affection for one another, still, peaceful handshake.
With Dawkins in particular, like I've met him a couple of times and I've read his books and I learned a lot from his books. And one of the things that I've thought about Dawkins all along, and I think this is reflected in the fact that he described himself as a cultural Christian recently, is that he is a good scientist. And a good scientist is someone who strives to seek the truth.
See, and this is where I disagree with Dr. Peterson, although Dr. Peterson is an incredibly brilliant man. And the funny thing about Dr. Peterson is he does not say things without thinking through what he says. And he's very intelligent. He's not just intelligent, but he's very wise about how he approaches the weight of his words. And so I would suspect that if Jordan Peterson is referring to Richard Dawkins right now as a man of good science or a good scientist, then that means Richard Dawkins is not the man that he was. I can just tell you that right now, because the man that Richard Dawkins was more occultist than he ever was a scientist. But it could very well be that his stated love for science is something that's beginning to take prominence again. And if that's the case, then that means he's searching for truth. And if he's searching for truth, it's a matter of time before the Lord gets a hold of his heart. That's exciting. And I really hope that's the case here.
And I think that truth-seeking is a religious enterprise. And so a true scientist is embedded in a religious enterprise. And I think that's why Richard Dawkins understands that he's a cultural Christian. But
that's actually a very, very astute observation. A lot more brilliant than some people might actually perceive, especially if they don't know who Richard Dawkins is. So it's a really, really good observation that he's making here. I would advise you guys to spend some time really considering how important science is in Christianity, because God is a creator of it all, right? So God's word is true. Every man's word is a lie. And when you begin to approach your conclusions based on the precedent of the scriptures, it changes how you view everything.
There's many things that Dr. Dawkins and I don't see eye to eye about. But some of that is because we don't understand each other, like a fair bit of it. And some of it is that the issue at hand is insanely complex and difficult to figure out. And neither of us should be presuming that we've got the right answer.
And this is the humility that I really love about Jordan Peterson. Yeah, he recognizes the fact that there are some complexities about the things that he explores that are far beyond his ability to be able to truly comprehend or understand. And this is where it goes back to what the Lord says, that, his thoughts are not our thoughts, his ways are not our ways. When we look at God, his wisdom and knowledge and understanding is far beyond our capacity to be able to search out. God is bigger than us in every way. And that's why when we worship him, it's a good thing, because we become more like him as we worship him. And that means we grow in our intellect and we grow in our understanding. And I like the fact that Dr. Peterson talks about the fact that part of the reason why we don't understand each other may be founded in the idea that we don't agree with one another, may be founded in the idea that we don't understand each other. Man, if we all thought that way, it would really change the kind of conversations that we have. Because I do think there are times where we have heated conversations, and those conversations are taking place because we just don't understand one another. And I've been through this on multiple occasions. I was sitting down with a group of some pretty brilliant YouTube people recently who were trying to explain something to me, and I kept coming back at them, and they perceived me as arguing, like I'm just arguing. And the guy who was the mastermind guy that was in the middle of it all, he says, "Hey, stop, you guys. James isn't arguing. He's trying to understand. Let me figure out a way to say something to him that will help him understand." And so he stopped, he paused for a moment, and then he gave me a phrase that helped me understand something completely and thoroughly, and it changed the conversation. So when we learn to understand one another, it also helps us in being able to better guide one another through what we know is a truthful principle. And that's what good truth seekers are always going to do. They're going to always seek out understanding. And it's funny because the Bible tells us to seek out wisdom and understanding.
Discourse that you're describing, which is competitive discourse, should be conducted in a manner that enables both of the participants to further seek the truth. And then you actually want that enmity, so to speak. You want the person you're talking to come at you with ideas that you haven't heard and positions that you haven't thought through, because in principle, they move you closer to the truth. And so hypothetically, Dr. Dawkins and I will be speaking at some time in the next few months. We're trying to arrange that now, and I'm really—
Goodness gracious, I would love to see that. I cannot wait when that happens, because that's going to be quite the talk, especially if Richard Dawkins is beginning to change his view on Christianity. It's going to be remarkable.
Looking forward to it, because I think that we can talk, because I think that he's trying to pursue the truth. And I found the same thing with Sam Harris. And I recently spoke to Dan Dennett, which went very well. I managed to speak to him in a few short weeks before his demise. And We had a very productive conversation. And you want conversations between people who don't hold the same viewpoint if they're reliable people, because that's where the real thinking takes place.
And so for me, what you just described was the defining feature of Western civilization. I was born in Somalia, and I lived in Saudi Arabia, and I lived in Kenya, and I lived in Ethiopia, and then I landed in the Netherlands in 1992. And there were so many differences between the world, the non-Western world I grew up in, and the Western world that I came to. But the one thing that I would say was really different, and was this, that...
Listen to this. Listen to what she says, and then look at her observation after she points out the one thing was very different. Watch this.
You can't really have these radically different views. You can be religious, you can be atheist, you can be pro-market, you can be anti-market. You can, in fact, in the streets of America, shout the most anti-American things, even burn the American flag, that is protected. That, for me, was wow. And when I say, let's talk about restoration, I'm now seeing a breakdown of that, a near collapse of that. On the political level, on the academic level, on the civic level, on the journalism level, we are breaking up into tribes, like the world where I came from, where you have not the pursuit of the truth, but ownership of the truth. My truth versus your truth, and that kind of nonsense is now a serious, serious, deep-rooted problem in the West. And that, I think, is an outcome of subversion.
We'll stop it here. And the reason why we'll stop it here is because this is the perfect leeway into what we know is coming. Now, what this woman calls subversion is, in essence, the way that the devil works. This is how the devil continues to show his ugly face when he does the evil that he does, and he seeks to destroy the world. And you have to remember this, guys, because when we have the discussion of the Antichrist, Antichrist does not mean against Christ, it means instead of Christ. And the spirit of Antichrist removes the consciousness of God in the collective world by replacing God. And so if you can replace God, then you can remove God from the mind and the hearts of everybody, the true and living God, because what you call God in your own world changes the society that you're in. And anytime you begin to see what is the introduction of totalitarianism, you see forming what this woman has just described. And by the way, this is interesting because to this day, we know that when totalitarianism comes in and people, and I want you to pay attention to this pattern because we're going to read about this pattern in just a second. When totalitarianism takes over, watch what happens, right? You have the totalitarian ruler that comes in with totalitarianism. Then what happens next? War. Totalitarianists have to bring in war because war becomes the distracting mechanism to the breakdown in society that led to the totalitarian ruler to come in the first place, right? In order for a totalitarian ruler to come in, the conditions have to be so bad because of the marked confusion and all of the nonsense that society has introduced that when it gets so bad, they look for an answer, and instead of looking to the true and living God for the answer because that God has been replaced by something else, they go and they look to the totalitarian ruler who promises a revolution, and they buy into that. Once they swallow it, hook, line, and sinker, and they start following the totalitarian ruler, they realize that they messed up, and by the time that they realize they messed up, it's too late. But the totalitarian ruler, what does he do? He recognizes, because he's inspired by the totalitarian ruler of all time, Satan. He is inspired by Satan. What he does is he says, I know how to fix this problem. I know how to keep the mass formation psychosis element continuing, and the way that I do that is I create war. So what do? They create war. And then war does what? War brings economic collapse. And economic collapse, once it comes, is not a bad thing when it comes to the elite that is preserved through that collapse. And when that happens, what it ultimately does is brings death. And by the time it gets to the place where there's mass death, that's when eyes are open. Oftentimes things change and the cycle starts all over again. Now, the Bible tells us something unique. The Bible tells us in the book of Thessalonians, this is 2 Thessalonians, that the church filled with the Spirit of God acts as the preserving influence, okay, that keeps the final Antichrist from coming into play. Okay, so if we know that and we understand that from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, then we also understand that every single time we see a totalitarian ruler come in, we see the pattern of war being established, we see economic loss happening and death taking place, it's always going to be limited. Why? Because when Christians are living on this earth, it cannot have the ultimate effect that we know it could potentially have. But there will come a point in time where the church will be raptured, and we know that that's going to happen. That happens in essence when you look at the book of Revelation. That happens right at the end of Revelation 3, the beginning of Revelation chapter 4, so that when you get into Revelation chapter 6, guess what Revelation 6 does? Revelation 6 describes the pattern. Let me read it to you. Watch what it says here. This is pretty amazing. Follow me through with this because I'm going to read this all the way through. It says, "And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of 4 beasts saying, 'Come and see.' And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." Now, I have heard a lot of people talk about all kinds of nonsense about what this horse is. We know what this horse is. This horse is the Antichrist, okay? It's not difficult. I know some people conflate this horse with the horse that we read about later on in Revelation. They're not the same horses, but the rider of the white horse is the Antichrist. He is the ultimate totalitarian ruler. So he comes, the Bible says that he's on a white horse. He has a bow, but doesn't have an arrow, and he's got a crown, which means he's going to be a totalitarian ruler. And the way he comes to that place of totalitarianism is the promise to provide a solution to a massive problem that is going to get worse when the church is raptured. Now think about it. When the church is raptured, there won't be any more check and balance according to 2 Thessalonians. So this Antichrist is going to be revealed to the world, and the effects that he has are going to be far more staggering than anything we saw implemented in Marxism in the last century. It's going to be far worse than anything we saw under communism with Stalin or what happened during World War II. It's going to be far worse than anything that we've seen. Look, watch what it says in verse 3. "And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, 'Come and see.' And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given unto him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword." So the second rider, which is the rider on the red horse, is war. So you have the totalitarian ruler that comes in through the ruler, the totalitarian ruler through the function of totalitarianism. What happens? You've got the rider of the red horse. War comes into play. And by the way, if you look at it, this is a pattern that we can see replicatable in every single context. Look at the new totalitarian ruler in Ukraine, right? When you start looking at Zelensky, he has no desire for freedom. He's a totalitarian ruler. What is he doing? He's encouraging war. Through the encouragement of war, he's destroying his own economy. And through that, we are seeing death in ways we had never seen before. And by the way, he is a totalitarian ruler. He has suspended elections in his country. I mean, that's exactly what he is. But we know that the final Antichrist will be way worse than him. But that's a picture. He's a picture of things to come. So we see this red horse and the great sword, and we see people, we see war being affected. Look at the next one, right? "And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, 'Come and see.' And behold, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand." And watch this. Listen, this is interesting. "And I heard a voice in the midst of 4 beasts say, 'A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. See thou hurt not the oil and the wine.'" Now think about this for a second. That means people will, in essence, the kind of inflation alone that's going to take place, the economy is going to collapse. People are not even going to be able to buy bread with a year's worth of salary. It's going to be bad. But look what it says. "See thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So you've got a totalitarian ruler that comes into play. You've got war right after that. After war, you have economic collapse. But while the economy is collapsing because you're under the auspice of a totalitarian ruler and the creator of war came from this special class, you have a ruling class. And the ruling class gets richer while the rest of the economy collapses. This should not surprise anybody. This shouldn't surprise anybody. Look what happens next. This gets heavy. And by the way, can I just say this about the ruling class? Look at what we're seeing right now. Look at the World Economic Forum. Look at the Clintons. Look at the Obamas. Look at all of the ruling class that exists right now that meets this precipice. It's just interesting. Look what it goes on to say. It says, and when it opened the fourth seal, this is verse 7, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with beasts of the earth. Folks, do you understand how significant this is? The rider of the pale horse executes death, and what happens is a fourth of the world's population dies. In the last 100 years, we've seen probably what we believe to be close to 100+ million people dying as a result of totalitarian rule and war that comes from that and economic collapse. But can you imagine what it's going to look like? If you thought 100 million or 200 million or 300 million people dying as a result of totalitarian rule, can you imagine the last totalitarian ruler on the face of the earth, the Antichrist, when he rules, the resulting death will be a quarter of the population. If that is in terms that we can understand today, it's a couple billion people. Probably be more than that by the time we get to this point. Folks, the pattern is replicatable. I bring this up because I'm telling you that what this woman is seeing are patterns that have existed from the beginning of time through the execution of Satan's ideals and Satan's desire to destroy all that God has made good. This is a pattern that can be viewed because we know Satan's MO. It's time that we wake up and understand what's in front of us and recognize what's taking place. Folks, I can just tell you this right now because this is important. The more we give ourselves to the Word of God and the more that we understand what the Bible says concerning these things, the more aware we are. And notice this, if the Bible says that the church being filled with the Spirit is the preserving influence for all of these things, then how much more dedicated and committed should we be to walking as men and women who stand up for righteousness? Why aren't we in school board meetings? Why aren't we actively involved in ministry in our churches? Why aren't we homeschooling our children? Why aren't we going out of our way to stand up against these nonsensical lies? Why are we not identifying the greatest conspirator that has ever existed in human history, the devil? Why aren't we giving people an education in the Word of God to know and understand what's in front of us? Because, folks, I got to tell you this. As gloomy and as ugly as the future seems, know that our future is exciting. Know that there's hope. And the way that we establish our hope in the things that we do with all of this is we say, Lord, I'm looking to you for insight and wisdom and direction. And as God prepares us for what's to come, then when we approach it, we can be excited because we know God's word is true. And folks, I'm telling you, we have a lot to be excited about. So I'm telling you, I'm here to tell you, I'm encouraging you, listen to me, get out there, fight the good fight, because nothing but good awaits. God is faithful, and he continues to be faithful. And what we have waiting for us, not only in eternity, is incredible, but the life that God wants you to live here and now is remarkable. So let's do it. Let's fight the good fight, and let's do what God has set in his heart for us to do. Let's live for him, and let's stand up for righteousness. God bless you.